We're in the book of Jonah, chapter 4, verses 5 through 11. Hear the word of the Lord. Then Jonah went out of the city and sat down east of the city and made a booth for himself there. He sat under it in the shade, waiting to see what would become of the city. The Lord God appointed a bush and made it come up over Jonah and gave shade over his head to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was very happy about the bush. But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the bush so that it withered. When the sun rose, God prepared a sultry east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint, and he asked that he might die. He said, "It is better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the bush?" And he said, "Yes, angry enough to die." Thank you for laughing. You guys are really tracking with this book, by the way. Good job. Then the Lord said, "You are concerned about the bush, for which you did not labor, and which you did not grow. It came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, we continue our series this morning. We're going to close out the book of Jonah, our obscure minor prophet this morning. Now, remember, after Jonah's temper tantrum last week in verses 1 through 4, God simply asks him this question. He says, "Hey, Jonah, how is all this anger serving you? I know you hate the Assyrians. I know you hate Nineveh. I got it. I know you're bitter all the way down to your toes. I understand that. I see that you are so angry that you are mocking my compassion and my mercy. And you're mocking me not for being cruel and angry, but for being good and for being faithful, for being generous. But Jonah, is the anger really serving you? That's where we ended last week. Is this anger really working for you?" But Jonah doesn't answer God. As we see this morning, he just walks away from the question. We're told he just heads east. And that is because this is not Jonah's idea of a happy ending at all. This is not how he expected things to work out. We're told that he goes outside the city. He perches himself up on the hill. He builds himself a little shade tent, maybe pops some popcorn, and he waits to see what's going to happen to Nineveh. See, even now, he is still stubbornly hoping that God is going to destroy all of these people. You know how in some movies, after the movie's over, after the credits are starting to roll, there is sometimes like a final secret surprise scene? Do you know what I'm talking about? A final scene that if you're very, very patient, you might catch. It generally will, prepare you for the sequel. It's almost like that's what Jonah's waiting for. He's holding out hope for like a post-credit movie scene, where instead of a city rescued and redeemed and forgiven, God's going to suddenly rain down like fire and brimstone on Nineveh. He's that angry and delusional. But thankfully, God is not done trying to get through to Jonah. So God is going to use this mysterious plant, this bush, as a glorified object lesson for Jonah. And so as he sits on his hillside in the desert heat, sweating and bitter and angry, we're told that God causes this large plant to grow up over and around Jonah to relieve him of his discomfort. And we're told that Jonah is happy about it. And he's not just happy, he's very happy. He's hugely happy. Remember in week 1 that I told you that the author is going to use a lot of hyperbole and exaggeration to make his point. And so note that this is the first time in the whole book that we find that Jonah is not sad, mad, or suicidal. Jonah is very, very happy. He finally has a little bit of shade. I mean, Nineveh's not bursting into flames, unfortunately, but there is some good shade. And so Jonah is thrilled. He loves this plant. Well, while he is sleeping, God sends a worm to devour this plant. And even worse, as the hot sun rises, there is a scorching east wind. The heat becomes unbearable. The dust is flying, the sun is burning, and his beloved plant has now been devoured. And so Jonah is furious yet again. Yes, because Nineveh is still standing, and his beloved plant is gone. And he tells God again he wants to die. And so then Jonah and God, they have this little exchange that ends the book for us. Let me just read this again. But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the bush?" And he says, "Yes, angry enough to die." And the Lord said, "You're concerned about the bush for which you did not labor and which you did not grow. It came into being in the night and perished in the night. And should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who did not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" Now, in literature, this sort of argument is often called a fortiori, but in rabbinic literature, it's called a kal vahomer. Kal vahomer. And it means from light to heavy. It's a comparison argument. Jesus and Paul do it all the time in the New Testament. For example, Jesus is arguing with the Pharisees, and he tells them this. He says, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and pull it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." It's a rhetorical device. It's supposed to show you that this is obviously so much more important than that, right? And so let's see what sort of kal vahomer God is setting up for Jonah, shall we? He says, "Jonah, you did not create or care for the plant, but I did create and care for the Ninevites." Jonah, we're talking about one plant. I'm talking about 120,000 people. Oh, and all their animals too. Jonah, you're talking about something you've had an experience with for one day. I'm talking about all of time. Okay, Jonah, you cared for, you were concerned, you maybe received some joy from this plant. How much more do you think I might care about the city of Nineveh? Okay? God says, you're so concerned about this plant, you're willing to die. Willing to die. Well, there's a whole city over there that can't tell their right hand from their left hand. Can you imagine how I might feel about 120,000 people that I created and love that have gone so far astray, they're so misguided, so lost, that they don't even know how to live. They don't even know how to function anymore. You care about one plant. I'm talking about 120,000 people. A plant you did nothing to create. And then the book just ends. Literally ends with God asking, "Don't you think I should care?" And that's how it closes out. An unanswered question. And that is because, remember, this book was never really about the historical Jonah, the prophet from the book of Kings. Jonah was just a bit character in our satire, helpful to get us laughing along, perfect for the plot line. Now, who is the book of Jonah really about? Who is the book of Jonah about? Yes, us. You and I. Jonah really wasn't written for the benefit of Nineveh or the religious outsider. No. Though I think there's plenty in there for them too. Jonah was written for the benefit of the religious reader, the faithful. For any of the folks who might get a bit self-righteous in their religious identity, who get a little ego kick out of checking all the right boxes. Jonah is written for any of us who might be tempted to believe from time to time that we might believe that we deserve God's love and grace more than the Ninevites do, whoever the Ninevites might be for us. And so Jonah ends with this unanswered question because we, the readers throughout history, we are invited to answer it with our own lives. We get to answer the question. For centuries, the readers of this little book have been given the invitation to end the narrative. It's up to us. How many of you guys watched the Avengers movies several years back? Tell me you watched the Avengers movies. It's really too late for me to apologize for spoilers, friends. But you know the ultimate bad guy, Thanos? Come on. Thanos spends his life collecting the Infinity Stones, right? So that he can place them in his glove of inevitable power so that he can snap his fingers at the end of the movie Infinity War and destroy half of the universe in order to put a stop to overpopulation, which he does at the end of the movie Infinity War. It's kind of a crazy end to a movie. I remember sitting in the theater being like, kind of weeping and being shocked that they would end a movie that way. It was brutal, brutal. But then in the sequel, in Endgame, all the Avengers superheroes that weren't disintegrated, that didn't like disappear into dust, right? They go back in time to change the past, and they fix like every evil thing that Thanos ever did, leading to this like cosmic battle and the self-sacrifice of Iron Man. And somehow all of that opens the way to an alternate ending where things work out how they were supposed to, where the good guys win and love conquers over evil and life conquers over death. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, if you're not into superheroes, I apologize. That metaphor will not serve you. But I think the book of Jonah, it actually functions really similarly. Because as the readers of Jonah, we get to see Jonah's life like play out so obviously and horribly wrong. And then we get to decide to go back and do it all differently. We get to do it differently. We get to ask, what if we didn't do it that way? What if it didn't have to be like that? What if we didn't run for Tarshish? What if we didn't have to run from what God was calling us to do with our lives? What if I didn't have to be swallowed by a giant fish before I just loved my enemies? What if instead we let down our guards and we just loved the folks that seemed like the Ninevites to us? What if we let go of our anger and our prejudice and instead grabbed hold of compassion with both hands? Pastor Tim Keller, in his book about Jonah, writes this. He says, "There are many people who have no idea what they should be living for or the meaning of their lives, nor have they any guide to tell right from wrong. And God looks down at people in that kind of spiritual fog, that spiritual stupidity, and he doesn't say, 'You idiots.' When we look at people who have brought trouble into their lives by their own foolishness, we say things like, 'Serves them right,' or we mock them on social media. What kind of imbecile says something like this? When we see people of the other political party defeated, we just gloat. This is all a way of detaching ourselves from them. We distance ourselves from them, partly out of pride, and partly because we don't want their unhappiness to be ours. God doesn't do that. Real compassion, the voluntary attachment of our hearts to others, means the sadness of their condition makes us sad. It affects us. That is deeply uncomfortable, but it is the character of compassion. Jonah invites us to write a different ending with our lives, friends. To see Jonah make the terrible mistake of mocking God's mercy and compassion, and then to use it as a catalyst to check our own tendencies to do the same. To take this weird little book of prophetic satire and then hold it up as the mirror that it is to our own lives, and allow it to read us, to see all the ways that we have begun to let anger and judgment seep in and transform us into someone we no longer recognize. This is a chance to ask God to help us forgive and to love our own Nineveh. And to do it so fully that, like Christ, we would be willing to lay our lives down, to become living sacrifices. You know, Jesus told his disciples, "This is how the world will know that you're my followers. This is the only way they're going to know that you're hanging out with me. How you love each other, how you love one another. That's going to be the tell. How you love." Friends, I pray that we would be really serious about becoming the kind of people that reflect the character of God. Who remember what Jonah was spewing out at God in his anger? "I just knew it. I knew you were gracious and compassionate. I knew you were slow to anger and abounding in love." I want us to be the kind of people that are really serious about reflecting that kind of character. Slow to anger, abounding in love and forgiveness.